What if our ancestors were the hunted and were completely defeated by a monkey? What if the ruler of the African savanna was not Homo, but a giant primate species? Before intelligence became the ultimate weapon, before fire was controlled and tools were sharpened, human ancestors once had to share their territory with a creature considered a true nightmare. That creature was Dinopithecus, a giant primate that once truly dominated the land. Dinopithecus was a perfect survival machine. It did not hesitate to attack weaker fellow primates. What would happen if Dinopithecus did not disappear? If, in that struggle for survival, humans were the ones who lost? To understand why Dinopithecus could become one of the greatest threats to early human ancestors, we must completely discard the familiar image of monkeys we know today. This was not an agile branch leaper, nor a primate that relied on cleverness or dexterity to survive. Dinopithecus was the product of a different evolutionary path, one where strength, body mass, and direct physical dominance were pushed to the extreme. First size, compared to modern baboon species, Dinopithecus was like an amplified version in both height and mass. An adult male could reach roughly 1.5 meters at the shoulder. In the rare moment when it stood upright on 2 legs, that stature could exceed 2 meters, an image enough to make any prehistoric human flee on instinct. But what was frightening was not only its height, but its muscular mass, with an average weight ranging from nearly 50 to more than 70 kilograms. The body of Dinopithecus was not lean but dense and heavy, like a living block of muscle born to collide and crush. Females were smaller, but still far larger than most other primates of their time. This shows that the entire species was designed to exist on the ground, not just a few exceptional individuals. In the natural world, when both males and females are large, it is often a sign of a species facing intense competition and needing strength to survive each day. The skull structure of Dinopithecus reinforces this even further. At first glance, it resembles modern baboons, but upon closer inspection, the differences become truly striking. The skull was thick and solid, lacking the facial cavities common in modern relatives, making the head appear as a single reinforced mass. The upper jaw was powerfully developed, firmly anchored to large muscle groups, producing an exceptional bite force. The teeth were not only large, but extremely durable, allowing it to crush hard foods, tear flesh, and even process small bones when necessary. What matters is this: such a jaw was not built solely for eating. In the wild, teeth and jaws are also weapons. They are used to threaten, to fight for territory, and in the harshest situations to attack enemies. For prehistoric humans, small creatures without significant claws or fangs, a single bite from Dinopithecus could be fatal. The way Dinopithecus moved made it resemble a living tank more than a monkey. Because of its large size and heavy body, climbing trees was no longer its primary advantage. Instead, it moved mainly on all fours across the ground. This posture distributed weight more evenly, improved balance, and was especially effective when charging straight forward. Its low center of gravity made Dinopithecus extremely difficult to knock over, even during powerful impacts. In a direct confrontation, this advantage was nearly absolute compared to smaller primates, or the still fragile ancestors of humans. Unlike predators that rely on high-speed bursts, Dinopithecus did not need to be the fastest. What it possessed was endurance and psychological pressure. A massive creature moving steadily, advancing step by heavy step without pause, was enough to drive prey into panic before escape became impossible. In the open savanna where cover was scarce, this advantage became even more deadly. All of these traits, size, mass, skull structure, jaws, and movement, did not exist in isolation. They combined to create a creature optimized for dominance on the ground. Dinopithecus did not need superior intelligence to win. It won through presence, through the weight of its body, through the sense that anything smaller should stay away if it wanted to live. And for that reason, when placing Dinopithecus beside early human ancestors, the question is no longer who was smarter, but whether that fragile, emerging intelligence had enough time to develop when faced from the very beginning. With a survival machine like this, Physical strength was only half the story. What truly turned Dinopithecus into a survival threat to prehistoric humans lay in how it lived, fed, and interacted with its surrounding environment. In the harsh ancient world where even the smallest mistake could lead to death, Dinopithecus did not survive by luck. It survived through an extremely effective ecological strategy. First was its diet. Dinopithecus was not restricted to a single food source. It did not rely entirely on fruit like many tree-dwelling primates, nor was it a specialized predator that ate only meat. Instead, it was a true omnivore. Chemical traces preserved in its tooth enamel show that Dinopithecus could consume a wide range of foods, from seasonal fruits, hard seeds, and young plant stems to energy-rich roots buried deep underground. When vegetation became scarce, meat was a perfectly viable option. This very flexibility made Dinopithecus particularly dangerous. During periods of environmental instability, prolonged droughts, declining vegetation, or intense competition, many other species were forced to migrate or starve. Dinopithecus did not. It could dig, crush, seize, and even scavenge carrion if necessary. In nature, the ability to be unfussy about food is often the key to survival, and Dinopithecus held that key firmly. But Dinopithecus was not merely an opportunist. With its superior size and strength, it was fully capable of actively hunting prey. Unlike big cats that hunt through bursts of speed, Dinopithecus hunted in a primate way, observing, approaching, pressuring, and striking when it had the advantage. Small to medium-sized prey, especially juveniles, injured individuals, or those separated from the group, were ideal targets. In this context, early human species, small, slow, and lacking weapons, became more vulnerable than ever. Researchers believe that Dinopithecus may have hunted, or at least directly attacked, prehistoric human species such as Australopithecus. It did not need to turn humans into a primary food source. A few deterrent attacks were enough to seize territory, water sources, or resource-rich foraging grounds. In the ancient world, losing territory meant a slow death. The social behavior of Dinopithecus made the situation even worse for any species living alongside it. Like modern baboons, Dinopithecus most likely lived in large troops with tight social structures and clear hierarchies. A single individual was already dangerous, but a coordinated group of Dinopithecus could exert overwhelming survival pressure. They could jointly defend water sources, surround intruders, or simply appear in overwhelming numbers to force rivals to retreat. Within the group, vigilance was maintained continuously. When one individual detected danger or potential prey, the signal spread rapidly. This made stealthy approaches nearly impossible. For prehistoric humans who relied on surprise to survive, this was a deadly disadvantage. A minor mistake, a strange sound, or a hesitant step could draw the attention of the entire group of Dinopithecus. The habitat preferences of Dinopithecus further highlighted its ecological role. They favored savannas, open woodlands, and areas near water sources, precisely the most resource-rich locations and the same places prehistoric humans were forced to visit in order to survive. This overlap was no coincidence. It created a constant but prolonged competition where each day of survival was the result of avoidance, calculation, and luck. What was most frightening about Dinopithecus was not its raw strength, but the stability of its survival strategy. It did not need to constantly change tactics. It did not need to invent tools. It only needed to continue doing what nature had already equipped it to do. Eat broadly, live in groups, control territory, and eliminate threats when necessary. For a very long time, that strategy worked. That is why, when seen from the perspective of prehistoric humans, Dinopithecus did not appear as a rare predator, but as a constant shadow in daily life. A creature always present at the edge of vision, at water sources, at foraging grounds, not always attacking, but always close enough to remind humans that they were never the dominant species. At least not until history turned in another direction. In the brutal survival landscape of the ancient African savanna, no species existed in isolation. Every organism was entangled in a complex web of relationships. hunting and being hunted, competing and avoiding, expanding and being pushed back. And within that web, Dinopithecus occupied a special position. Not an absolute apex ruler, but powerful enough to alter the evolutionary trajectories of species around it. During the same period, the savanna was far from lacking terrifying predators. Saber-toothed cats, prehistoric hyenas, giant crocodiles lurking near water sources, all were constant threats. But Dinopithecus was not easy prey. Its large size, muscular strength, and especially its group-living behavior significantly reduced the risk of being hunted. A lone predator might attack a weak or isolated individual, but confronting an entire troop of Dinopithecus was a gamble very few species dared to take. This created an interesting ecological phenomenon. Dinopithecus was both a species under threat and a source of pressure on others. It did not dominate through mass killing, but its presence alone was enough to force other predators to reconsider their strategies. Areas inhabited by Dinopithecus troops often became gray zones, places where other species were cautious and avoided unnecessary conflict. And ironically, those very regions often overlapped with the areas where human ancestors searched for food and shelter. The most significant conflict did not occur between Dinopithecus and large predators, but between Dinopithecus and early humans. Fossils show that they not only lived at the same time, but also shared living space. Species such as Australopithecus were small, slow-moving, and heavily dependent on gathering. In the same environment, two primate species with completely different survival strategies were forced to compete, not out of hostility, but because resources were finite. For Dinopithecus, prehistoric humans were not only competitors for food, but sometimes potential targets. Not every encounter ended in violence, but just a few such incidents were enough to generate enormous evolutionary pressure. Early human groups were forced to learn how to recognize signs of Dinopithecus presence, avoid their territories, or change foraging times to reduce the risk of confrontation. Conversely, the growing presence of humans gradually became a new factor in the ecosystem that Dinopithecus could not ignore. Though initially weaker, humans possessed a hidden advantage: flexible cooperation and rapid learning. When human groups discovered that standing together, throwing stones, shouting, or using objects as weapons could make Dinopithecus hesitate, the balance began to shift, very slowly but noticeably. The war between the two species was not fought through grand battles, but through thousands of small clashes. A foraging ground taken over, a cave no longer safe, a water source that had to be abandoned. Each time, humans either adapted or were eliminated. And each time, Dinopithecus also had to expend energy to defend territory, maintain group order, and confront an increasingly unpredictable rival. What must be noted is that during this phase, Dinopithecus still retained its physical advantage. But advantage did not mean absolute victory. A large body made it powerful, but also made it more dependent on stable food sources. Meanwhile, humans, though weaker, could move flexibly, exploit diverse environments, and gradually learn to turn disadvantages into strengths. Thus, the relationship between Dinopithecus and prehistoric humans was not simply predator and prey. It was a prolonged evolutionary struggle in which both sides influenced one another. Dinopithecus forced humans to become more alert, more intelligent, and more cooperative, and humans over time became a factor that helped undermine the position of this giant primate species. In that ancient ecosystem, there were no heroes and no villains. Only species trying to survive in an unforgiving world. And the struggle between these two primate lineages, one driven by pure strength, the other by emerging intelligence, formed the foundation for a larger question. If the outcome had been different, would there be any place for humans in today's world? When looking back at evolutionary history, the disappearance of Dinopithecus was not a sudden collapse, but the result of a long chain of silent, prolonged pressures. There was no asteroid, no single catastrophe that wiped this giant primate from the Earth. Instead, Dinopithecus was gradually pushed into a disadvantageous position in a world that was changing faster than it could adapt. The first factor and the foundation of all subsequent changes was climate change. During the late Pliocene and early Pleistocene, Africa was no longer a stable, familiar savanna. Dry cycles became longer, rainfall more erratic, and sparse forests gradually gave way to harsh, open landscapes. This did not only alter the scenery, but disrupted the entire food chain. For a large-bodied species like Dinopithecus, environmental stability was crucial. A massive body meant high and constant energy demands. When food was abundant, this was an advantage. But when resources became scarce, that very size turned into a burden. Prolonged dry seasons forced Dinopithecus to travel farther, expend more energy searching for food, while the returns grew ever smaller. Alongside environmental change were inherent biological limitations. Dinopithecus had evolved to dominate the ground in a specific context, but that strategy lacked flexibility. Slow reproductive cycles, long periods of infant care, and reliance on group structure kept population recovery rates low. Just a few generations under unfavorable conditions could cause numbers to drop sharply and make recovery extremely difficult. Meanwhile, the world around Dinopithecus did not stand still. Other species were also evolving, adapting, and seeking to occupy newly opened ecological niches. Most notable among them were early humans. At first, humans were only a minor element in the ecological picture. Small, weak, and highly vulnerable. But over time, they introduced an entirely different kind of pressure. Pressure driven by intelligence and behavior. Humans did not need large bodies to survive. They needed flexibility. When the environment changed, they changed with it. When one food source was depleted, they sought another. When a territory became dangerous, they withdrew, learned, and returned with new strategies. Crude stone tools, though initially limited in effect, gradually unlocked something Dinopithecus lacked: control of distance and reduced dependence on raw strength. Crucially, humans did not need to defeat Dinopithecus in direct confrontations. Eroding its advantages was enough. Each time humans secured a water source, a foraging ground, or a sheltering cave, Dinopithecus lost part of its living space. Each time humans learned to cooperate more effectively, the risk increased for a large primate that moved slowly and depended on fixed territories. At the same time, the growing presence of humans also altered the behavior of other predators. Large predators that had already been wary of Dinopithecus now had to factor humans into their hunting strategies as well. The ecosystem became more complex, competition more intense, and in such environments, less flexible species were usually the first to suffer. In the end, the extinction of Dinopithecus was not a failure of strength, but a failure of long-term adaptability. It was born to dominate a specific world, and it did so very well. But when that world changed, the traits that had once been advantages gradually became obstacles. Meanwhile, humans, though physically weaker, possessed an invisible weapon: the ability to change faster than their surroundings. Dinopithecus did not disappear because it lost a battle. It disappeared because it lost a race that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. A race between strength and adaptability. And the outcome of that race shaped the world we live in today, where humans exist only because they managed to change before it was too late. Take a few seconds to imagine the entire journey again, but this time remove humans from the picture. There is no sound of stone hammers striking together. There is no flickering fire in the darkness of night. There are no curious eyes lifted toward the sky, wondering where they came from and where they will go. On the African savanna, life continues, but along a completely different trajectory. Herds of giant primates move slowly across the dry land, leaving deep footprints pressed into the sand behind them. No one forges tools to resist them. No one draws maps. No one records history. Because history in that scenario never belonged to humans. If Dinopithecus had not disappeared, it is very likely that the fragile intelligence of our ancestors would have been suffocated at its earliest stage. Not because they were not intelligent enough, but because they did not have enough time. In evolution, time is a luxury, and with just a little more pressure, just a few more failed generations, an entire lineage can be erased forever. In that world, the earth would still be green. Forests would still grow. Rivers would still flow. Animals would still be born, hunt, and die, but there would be no cities rising from the plains. There would be no satellites orbiting the planet. No questions would ever be asked about the meaning of existence. Nature does not need an observer to continue functioning. The most sobering thought is not how powerful humans are, but how fragile we once were. The existence of humanity is not an inevitable outcome of evolution, but a chain of extremely narrow victories. All it would take is another species adapting slightly better. A competitor strong enough and persistent enough, and history could have turned in a completely different direction. Perhaps that is why stories of a world without humans should not make us arrogant, but humble. We are not the center of the earth. We are merely the lucky ones who survived long enough to tell our own story. And for that very reason, whenever we look back into that deep past, we understand one thing clearly. Life favors no one forever. The only thing allowed to endure is the one best adapted in the decisive moment. If hypotheses like these make you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to press like to support the video. Subscribe to the channel to join us on future journeys, where history, science, and imagination intersect, and where every what-if can open an entirely new world. Because who knows, in another timeline, the storyteller of this story may never have existed at all.